Okay, I think we're live. We're good to go. Great to be here, everyone. We've got a session today talking about ports, the resilience of ports, and also the role that ports play in cities and city resilience. My name is Juliette Meehan. I'm the Executive Director for the Resilience Shift. We've been doing work in the port space for several years. Resilience Shift looks across multiple infrastructure systems and sectors and focuses on enhancing their resilience. And I think the ports are a key example of a very interconnected global system that does need to be resilient in the face of a changing future. So just to introduce our session, we're looking at the critical role that ports play in cities. And as I said, the opportunity, and maybe we'll talk about some of the barriers that face us in terms of enhancing resilience of ports in the future. We're going to look at this in terms of a whole system approach. So the panelists that I'm delighted to have joining me today are from a range of different sectors that are all part of the broader ports system. And they'll be presenting their different perspectives, and then we'll also bring that together into what we can do together in terms of shaping future resilience. So the panelists that I've got with me, and thank you all very much for joining me. Catherine Palmer. Hi, Catherine. So Catherine's the shipping lead at the Climate Champions team at the moment, working hard on shaping the role of shipping in the race to zero and the race to resilience for COP26 and looking forward. She's seconded from the Lloyd's Register Maritime Group and has nearly 20 years experience in the shipping industry. So she's a thought leader and she's an expert on the environmental and sustainability issues within the maritime and shipping value chain, working with many of the big industry forums in this space, including the UN Global Compact, Getting to Zero Coalition, and the Sustainable Shipping Initiative. So welcome, Catherine, and thanks. And then we've got David Green. Hi, David, from Hitachi. So David's the laboratory manager at Hitachi Europe's Sustainability Lab. He's bringing some of the perspectives around electrification, transport, industrial decarbonisation, hydrogen, energy, asset management, and carbon. So really what David's view that he's bringing to this discussion is the role of technology and the future, the next generation technologies, and how they will be developed to support the future of ports from an environmental sustainability perspective, to achieve a net zero future. So welcome, David. We've then got Alistair Gale. So hi, Alistair, it's great to have you here. We've been working with Alistair in his role at the Port of London Authority for quite a while at the Resilience Shift. Alistair's the Director of Corporate Affairs and Strategy since 2006. And his role is around stakeholder engagement strategy, and particularly developing the Thames vision for the Port of London Authority. So a little bit about the Port of London Authority, because they're a very interesting organisation to provide that interface between the ports and the operations and also the City of London. The PLA oversees 95 miles of the tidal River Thames through London and out to the North Sea. The Thames overall is home to the UK's largest port, which handles some 50 million tonnes of fuel. And the Thames is also the country's busiest inland waterway for both passengers and freight. And importantly, in terms of the wider system context, it's a critical centre for sport and recreation and valued habitat for London. And then finally, last but not least, my colleague Mark Button, who's been leading our work around resilience for ports at the Resilience Shift, working across the global ports community, looking at our whole systems approach, thinking about the multiple factors to the resilience of ports. Mark's real passion is about enhancing resilience of our infrastructure systems through the net zero transformation. And I think that's key. The opportunity that we have now as we transform ports and the wider system to net zero must also be used to ensure that they're resilient in the face of an uncertain future. So welcome, Mark, as well. The format of our session today, I'll hand over to Mark to do a a brief overview of some of the work and thinking we've been doing around this resilience shift. Then I'll come back to each of the panelists. We'll get some of their individual perspectives and then bring it into a sort of more of a discussion format. If there are members of the audience who've got questions for the panelists, please type those in as you think of them, and I will do my best to moderate and bring them into the discussion as we go. So thank you, and over to you, Mark.
Great, thank you very much, Juliet. So hi everyone, before we start the panel discussion, I just wanted to frame the topic today by first playing a really brief video and then showing a few slides that set the scene on the opportunity for ports to unlock city resilience. So first of all, here's the video.
In increasingly complex and uncertain times, port resilience is essential to business continuity, local communities, and the economy. The resilience shift highlights the opportunity for ports to help decarbonise. They can do this through the transformation of energy systems, supply chains, and global shipping, at the same time as helping our society build resilience to future uncertainties.
Resilience for Ports was set up in September 2020 to support port systems and global supply chains to withstand multiple drivers of disruption. A collaboration of public and private stakeholders have come together to define social, environmental and economic outcomes of ports in the face of decarbonisation, automation, technology, climate change and global trade patterns, to help build critical infrastructure systems that can withstand challenging times and transform ports into carbon-neutral smart hubs that are resilient to future uncertainties. With over 20 years' experience working on infrastructure projects, Juliet Meehan has an in-depth understanding of infrastructure resilience.
If you ask people for a definition of resilience, 20 people will give you 20 subtly different definitions. Resilience is the ability to withstand, or if not withstand, adapt to and recover positively from unexpected events. Recently, we've had the Suez Canal crisis. Again, we've had Brexit. You know, there are many things that have shown there is some fragility in ports, and it doesn't take long to see the impacts on society, empty supermarket shelves, or missing goods and products.
Alistair Gale believes resilience is part of a long-term strategy for the Port of London Authority.
As the UK's major port, we have a particularly important role to play in making sure that the supply chains that we are part of don't break at any point. It's absolutely crucial, and resilience is a fundamental part of that. So whether that's food to be on the supermarket shelves, that's fuel in the forecourts, or it's medicines in the pharmacy, that's a fundamental role for ports, and consequently resilience.
In the public eye, ports have recently been under strain as a result of Brexit trade negotiations and shortages of everyday supplies to consumers during the global pandemic.
We've seen the supply chain massively challenged over the last 18 months or so, starting off with COVID-19, which presented a whole array of challenges. What organisations need to start to do is not go, well, it's happened, we just got to wait. They need to start looking at what the other options are.
Resilience, that's taking measures to cope with changes or challenges that are only going to get worse in the future, is something that's best done as early on in the process of planning and development as possible to avoid making expensive mistakes which only need to be changed later on. For ports to be able to adapt and become more resilient requires investment. Since 2006, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has funded adaptation projects in 27 countries to build resilience to the impacts of climate change.
It's much more cost effective to design your infrastructure to cope with future climate and to operate it in a way that is sort of responding to or prepared for those sort of impacts that you're expecting to get, rather than paying to rebuild it afterwards.
That was with ACOM, was that?
Yeah. So there can be changes to actually the physical design of the infrastructure, say like the drainage design or the quay wall height, or improvements to breakwaters. We work with them to understand what the impacts to their business are from physical climate risk, sea level rise, or increases in storm surges and the energy of waves that hitting the ports. It can also be things like increased rainfall, precipitation, increased temperatures. We can then help them to respond to the risks.
Ports are catalysts for the decarbonisation agenda. As many fuels are piped or shipped through ports for storage and distribution, the energy sector is critically linked to the transformation of port systems. Port operators need to meet the dual challenge of playing their role in the UK's drive to be carbon net zero by 2050, whilst ensuring their operations are resilient in the face of a changing climate.
Ports are really a nexus that fully integrates with the energy system. So there's almost no division between what ports do and what energy does. Ports within themselves, of course, use energy and need to be able to respond to what the energy system is doing, both economically and in terms of its carbon trajectory.
The resilience shift is focused on helping ports to consider resilience options as positive actions and not as hasty reactions.
We tend to worry about the last bad thing that happened. So there'll be a lot of measures in place for pandemics, but probably the next bad thing that happens won't be a pandemic. So we're trying to build the framework that says, think about the bigger picture, think about everything that's changing and make your resilience enhancements in that context.
Hi again, everyone. So we've just heard about the vital role ports play, how disruption at ports can ripple out across society, and the need for ports to be resilient to future uncertainties. We also heard about the fundamental role ports play in decarbonisation, which I'd like to briefly expand upon. So the global shift to net zero emissions will have far-reaching implications for ports and, of course, the cities they're part of. So ports themselves will need to decarbonise using new electric equipment, sequestering carbon by developing marine habitats, and generating energy from renewables. Ports will also facilitate decarbonisation of marine and land-based transport systems through provision of future fuels and battery recharging. Ports will also play a major role in the hydrogen economy, for example, through importing feedstock products, exporting captured carbon, or exporting hydrogen for use in other cities. So really this means major investment and a need to approach transformation in a holistic manner. So over the last 18 months, Arup have been working with the Resilience Shift and a range of global stakeholders to define what a whole systems approach to change could look like. So one that enhances resilience through transformation, amplifying benefits for communities, for cities, and businesses that are connected to ports. So to do this, we describe ports as a hub of systems, identifying their different connections to cities, whether through energy systems, supply chains, passenger transport links, or digital connectivity. And a really important part of this was to capture not just the physical assets that deliver the port's functions, but the wider social, environmental, economic, and institutional elements that make up the port and its connections with city systems. So really, resilience needs the whole system to function, not just individual elements. And the connections between ports and cities are as vital as the port elements themselves. So working with the value chain of ports, including city focus groups such as GCOM, we defined the range of resilience challenges ports currently face. So these include shocks from natural coastal hazards, cybersecurity and smuggling, but also stresses linked to fragmented governance, hinterland connectivity, and ever-changing vessel needs. And really the port-city interface is key to many of these challenges. As well as decarbonisation, we looked at the trends and developments linked to communities and the environment, as well as technology and digital, and how they might shape resilience. So you can see a few examples here. We described how these disruptors offer opportunities to enhance resilience, but can also create new vulnerabilities. So finally, two key areas that this study highlighted were firstly the need for digital platforms that can bring together both stakeholders and assets in cities and ports to shape resilience through change. And secondly, was the need for practical guidance on bringing together the decarbonisation and resilience agendas. So this really highlights the need for both innovation and partnerships, two themes that we'd like to explore today with our panel. So I'll now hand back to Juliette to open the discussions. You're on mute, Juliette.
I thought I'd unclicked it. Thank you. So thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for setting the scene. I think we've reconvened now as a panel. So I think what I'd really like to do is hear from each of our panel members. I think reflecting exactly what Mark was just saying. It's not possible for a port itself to become resilient on its own, because a port is so dependent on the wider system that it's part of, and that comes from the shipping side and also to the city side. But everyone's got different roles to play, and I think that's what we're interested in exploring in this discussion. Where are some of the key opportunities for different parts of the system to work together? And also for all of you, your honest reflection about where some of those barriers are, because if, at the end of this discussion, we can come out with some ideas of next steps, how to improve and work together and create a more systemic approach in the future, that would be great. So yeah, the opportunities and barriers for ensuring that ports, as well as the cities they're part of, with being part of the Innovate for Cities event, there'll be many city practitioners in the audience. So how to ensure that ports and the cities are resilient, and we're thinking about the future of ports, and I think this is really important. As we'd already said, decarbonisation of ports and the wider system is happening anyway. Adoption of new technologies is happening anyway, and the real area of interest for us is therefore how to build resilience into those changes. So I think it would be interesting to start with Alistair. So Alistair from Port of London Authority having that role as in the Ports Authority, and then I'll present the same question to Catherine and David. So Alistair first, thank you.
Sure. So thank you very much, Juliette. Just to recap, I'm Alistair Gale, Director of Corporate Affairs and Strategy at the Port of London Authority. 95 miles of river, the UK's biggest port. And I think the 95 miles is really important because over that span of river, you're encompassing very different activities, from the sport and recreation side through to a capital cities river with barges and passenger vessels moving around, and then further downriver, an estuarial port. I think one other thing, just for context for some of the things that we'll cover, is that we launched our first river development framework, the Thames Vision, in 2016. And now, so 5 years later, we're reviewing it in order to reflect and pick up many of the themes that we're going to be talking about now, in particular decarbonisation, but also how a changing city post-COVID is going to need different things from its port. So I spend a lot of time looking at the future of the River Thames and how it serves London and the wider southeast. So resilience is a massive topic for us. The first thing I'd pick up on is the link between the city and the port. And really, it's simple but often missed, and it is a point that came through, I hope, in the film. The port is essential because it satisfies the city's population's needs for the most basic things, for the food, for the fuel, for building materials, but also the more fun, the laptops, the trainers, and so on. And this came into really sharp relief in the pandemic. And I think what might daunt us all and why we need to discuss this more now is that as the climate changes, we have to expect to see more black swan events, maybe not quite as dramatic as the pandemic, but certainly more frequent intervention, natural events that will require us to react. And this has been put into really stark relief today with the UK Environment Agency issuing a warning on the pressing need for adjusting to climate change, which has generated headlines as stark as "adapt or die." Now, that is pretty stark, but I think hotter, drier summers and warmer, wetter winters could presage difficulties for us. So resilience is a key building block. And I think for me, it's not simply making the existing systems keep working, it's actually increasing resilience as we work through what's going to be a seismic transformation of the economy and as our lives as we go through decarbonisation. I think the other point just to make really quickly is that cities often grow from their ports, and that's certainly true of London. And in the early days, the links between the two were very tight, and it was geographically tight because the port activities were in the city. But over time, ships have got bigger and they've chased downriver after the deeper water, which is now needed for the bigger ships. So the port's out of sight, but that intrinsic link hasn't been broken. The coffee that you drink in the morning, the orange juice you drink, all of it is your link to the port that serves you. So one of the things that is absolutely critical to this whole process is collaboration, both for us at a local level, working with our partners in the city, but also drawing in the experience from international partners as well.
Excellent, thanks, Alistair. Really, really helpful framing. So now it'd be great to hear from Catherine from the perspective of the shipping and maritime sector.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to join this session today. I think, you know, Alistair, with his take on ports, very much part of the maritime value chain, you know, and a key actor within that value chain. And, you know, the interconnectedness of the maritime value chain with communities means that if we, you know, the decarbonising of shipping can help unlock and realise, you know, city, region and country opportunities, and the, you know, to really focus on the fact that maritime is a good quality demand sector as a first mover for decarbonisation opportunities, which can then help other industrial sectors follow as they need to decarbonise. Because the majority of the technology and investment challenge for decarbonising maritime is actually land-based as opposed to sea or water-based. You know, there is a projected $1.6 trillion investment needed by 2030 in renewable power, and the production of zero carbon fuels needs to scale significantly and could represent up to about 90% of the capex needed to decarbonise shipping, and that includes ports infrastructure. So ports are in a really unique position. You know, they connect the land to the sea and they connect communities. And, you know, every port is different and ports can take very different roles. You know, so for example, you know, we have large industrial scale ports, which are also major energy hubs. Or, you know, through bilateral agreements on a port to port basis, we can look at establishing, you know, the first green corridors for first mover supply chains on those liner routes. Or ports can start to exploit new energy flows as countries commit to being able to produce green hydrogen because they are ideally located for a good source of renewable electricity that is at a low cost option. And a lot of those countries are emerging economies. And so this brings around the inclusiveness of the transition for decarbonising the maritime sector and how that transition needs to be fair and just and provides many opportunities for emerging economies, less developed countries and small island developing states. because this transition to zero carbon in the maritime supply chains will only be possible if it draws on the expertise of the workforce. And that workforce is also important both onshore and those at sea. And the new opportunities for decent work that could be created across the value chain, such as the production of zero emission fuels. Again, a lot of this could evolve, and it's the emerging economies where we see a lot of this opportunity for the production of zero carbon fuels because of their access to cheap renewable electricity. So I think what's really important as we talk about resilience and ports, and we talk about how ports can help cities become more resilient, and the interface and that ports have with the ships on the water, we have to take a just transition approach. And so the benefits of this decarbonisation and resilience are equitably shared and accessible to all. And when we talk about reskilling and upskilling and skills transfer, it all needs to be incorporated into how we talk about resilience and the race to zero. So we can ensure that the maritime sector, as it moves to new fuel sources, enables greater diversity and inclusion and mitigates job losses through skills development and creates new green opportunities and decent jobs. And we can advocate the government policies to support this just transition. So I think for me, everything is interconnected. And it's very, we look at the maritime value chain and the value that has to countries, communities, and cities, and start to see that some cities and ports can move at very different paces. So we can take advantage of those first mover opportunities through working very closely with ports and cities who can probably move a lot quicker than a country can at a country level to start with. So I very much look forward to this opportunity, which I think the maritime value chain has at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and completely agree with particularly the point you're making about the just transition. And I think when we're talking about resilience, it's very important. That's not just the physical resilience of the port itself, but the people who work there, the surrounding community. So bringing that just transition part of the debate into it is really important. So to move on to David, just to sort of hear your reflections and bringing the role of technology in the future of ports and their resilience.
Okay, so thank you for that, Juliet. So and thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to speak here. So Hitachi has always, throughout its lifetime, and it's kind of been around for 100 plus years, has been striving for innovation and driving positive social change and benefits as our kind of core value, really, of what we do. And so we see that particularly within the European R&D team, which I lead, that kind of we're pushing ahead very heavily around sustainability and environmental innovation, because that's key to the changes that we can make to people's lives today and continue to will in the future. And we see that developing both physical and increasingly so digital products and solutions, we can enable our customers to achieve net zero through collaboration. So in terms of ports, we currently see that ports face a number of challenges from an energy and a mobility and an infrastructure point of view, because they can, in some perspectives, be seen as at the end of the line of infrastructure, and particularly from a technology point of view, many of them kind of aren't particularly well integrated as some other industries might be that we see. But we kind of see that from a big picture point of view within a nation and within internationally, that actually ports are really key, and they're core to that whole network and interconnection. And so therefore we need to think more about, well, how can we develop them, what technologies are required. And so within ports currently, there are a lot of what we describe as more point technologies. So these are around delivering particular required services and infrastructure solutions. And there's not enough communication between different systems. So energy systems don't really communicate with operational systems particularly well, or kind of scheduling systems and so on. And so that's where there's kind of a huge amount of opportunity. And just in that simple case, you can see that ports combine many complex infrastructure systems, and they can develop as a hub from which connected thinking from start can start. So and this is kind of a great opportunity for us to explore technologies to enable that integration of solutions and technologies. I think one of the benefits as well of ports, depending on the type, is that they can potentially be seen as you can create it as a closed system where innovative solutions, very early innovative solutions, can be piloted. Because for technology, that's always a challenge. We can develop it in the lab, we can try it on very small scale things, but when it gets to a kind of commercial space, then being able to demonstrate it and pilot it is really challenging, and you need to find a way to control your externalities. And we see the kind of only way to kind of think and evolve this the future is through integrated systems, thinking of everything together and through a systems approach. So and I think what's really important, as we're seeing increasingly so now in ports, and as others have intimated, is around the kind of cross-vector element of ports, and that we need to think about this, because there's kind of electricity generation, there's hydrogen usage, consumption, there's various fuels, there's also potentially integration with heat and with some industrial processes as well. And so our kind of digital solutions can be piloted in those kind of locations. At Hitachi, we see that along with others, that we bring, yes, that integrated thinking, but also the orchestration that is required. So it needs that additional level to see across all the systems and all that's going on, and bring everything together and try to coordinate accordingly. And importantly, there's we've got the markets and the stakeholders already in place, so it actually makes it an ideal starting point for that early decarbonisation. In terms of the routes to decarbonisation, I think there's you've got in place lots of different technologies that need to be combined. You've got various energy systems, fuels. You've got new fuel systems as well coming in. So you've got hydrogen as an opportunity, synthetic fuels, ammonia, and so on and so forth, all to help to decarbonise. There's also increasing kind of control and systems, and then also there's interrelation with markets and trading and transport and so on. So yes, so I kind of think that there's a kind of good opportunity there to start small and then kind of build out. We see that there's an opportunity to de-risk technology and then build out to kind of more interconnected ports. Ones like the London one, much closer to cities, and have that kind of wider interaction, and then this allows then, once we've developed the technology, to allow for greater expansion of the systems to operate on a national and international manner. And I think finally, it's kind of really important that these technologies aren't bespoke to particular applications, that we see that they can be replicated, and the approach that we kind of see as potential for ports, for technology to develop that technology is scalable and fully replicable, and allows us to, yes, digitize a port and its surrounding city, but also allow it to connect wider with other ports and hubs throughout the country and the world.
Thank you so much, David. There was some really interesting points in there, and I think the opportunity to sort of test new innovations in ports and then scale up is really important. And that picks up again on this issue of ports as part of the wider city system. Anyone in the audience who does have questions about what any of our panelists have presented to date, please do submit them, and I'll try and bring them into the discussion. I think one of the things that I wanted to get views from you on, we all know, and I think it's come up in your interventions and in Mark's presentation, that there can be fragmentation in the port system, that quite often decisions are made in silos between these different actors. And we also know that fragmentation is an enemy of resilience, particularly when a catastrophic event does happen and everyone needs to respond and recover. So it'd be great to hear how do you think different actors in the port system need to work together, and what could we do? And I think, excuse me, I'll put that question to Catherine first.
Yeah, thank you very much. Interesting question, because working in the shipping industry, it is very diverse, whether you look at it by ship size, type, operating profile. You can slice and dice the diversity of the shipping industry in so many different ways. But then do we say that it is fragmented because of that, or do we actually say that diversity can play to its strengths? And I think where we are in the shipping's transition, this, I wouldn't call it fragmentation. This is a little bit of diversity. It plays to opportunities that certain parts of the system can move earlier than others. And the benefits of certain parts of the system moving earlier than others means that they can pilot technology and innovate. You can get the lessons learned that are needed as we go through this significant technology transition. And those pilots and those first mover opportunities are really there to be able, ultimately to drive costs down for everyone else who follows. So I think, yes, every port is different. Its model is different. Its business model is different. Some are privately owned, some are publicly owned as we look around the world. But as I say, I think ports and cities can often move a lot quicker than countries when it comes to decarbonisation. So putting in place kind of bilateral agreements between on specific line of routes with a certain trade route, shipping line, to ports, we can try something as a first mover opportunity a lot quicker and learn from it and see if the technology is scalable, it's viable, and ultimately bring down costs. So I think this fragmentation, as you've talked about it, can be seen as an opportunity rather than just being seen as, and expecting everybody to move together at the same pace.
Thanks, Catherine. That's a really good point, and I think to reposition fragmentation as diversity is a great reflection. So Alistair, again, how different actors in the system can work together. And I think another part of the question to you, and Catherine was talking about, sort of partnering of ports and things. Have you got any tangible examples of working collaboratively or sharing knowledge with other ports through the PLA?
So I'll start just with just an observation on the fragmentation observation, which I think is absolutely correct, that different ship types will adopt the newer technologies at a different pace. My reflection is that as a port authority looking to manage different ships with different technologies at the same time, that will be a particular challenge for us, because we will have certain sectors which have adopted early and we can manage them in a specific way. There'll be others which are slower, where we'll have to manage them in, let's say, the conventional way until they catch up. Anyway, that's just a quick observation. Just in terms of how you bridge between all of these different actors, I think certainly our experience in London anyway is that what you need to have is a convener or a bridge, somebody who can bring people together to have these difficult conversations, and so, well, potentially difficult conversations. So for us, we're lucky in that we are geographically, our remit is the only one that covers the extent of the tidal Thames, 95 miles of river. So that means we can legitimately bring people together and advocate for the adoption of the newer technologies, the decarbonisation and so on. So we've done some very innovative work there around an inland roadmap for a roadmap for the decarbonisation of inland freight and passenger vessels, just as an example. We're also working very hard to draw in the experience from other cities as well. So last year, I think it was last year, the years seem to blur a bit through COVID, but last year we did a study looking at Great River cities' reactions to the pandemic and what it had done in terms, what it meant in terms of how they were taking forward their various plans for river developments and port developments. And we found that they were accelerating a lot of them, particularly around climate resilience. And that piece is on our the report of that is on our website. And I think the key point for me, just as a sort of a rounding point, is that nobody here has the specific answers. Nobody has all the answers to all of the challenges we face. And so I think it's the collaboration piece, standing on each other's shoulders, if you like, and looking out and learning from others can be particularly helpful. And that's one thing that I'm very keen to keep doing.
Great, thanks, Alistair. And that would be, I don't know if one of our support on the call is able to find the link to the PLA report about the river cities. I think that's really interesting and does pick up on this, the opportunities of sharing knowledge. Are there any ports that you work? I mean, do you work collaboratively with other ports? Does it feel to you like in general they're all answering their own sort of immediate challenges rather than more systemic view?
That's actually a really interesting question, and I'm reminded of a view that our chairman has shared, which is that in this case, looking at decarbonisation, although we compete for cargoes and so on, we actually have more in common around these challenges. So just as an example, today it's being announced that some work we've received for a consortium that we're leading. We've received some funding from Marry UK, which is a UK innovation body. We've received some funding for them to do work looking at a hydrogen highway, and engaged in that will be the UK port bodies as well, in order that whatever we learn can be shared. And so, as I say, people can advance more quickly by sharing that knowledge together.
Great, that sounds exactly the kinds of examples I was looking for. So David, from your perspective as a technology provider, do you tend to be responding to sort of one client or customer in a particular sector? Is there what would you like to see in terms of bringing some of these different actors together so that you can provide that more joined up?
So kind of building on what other people have said, and I guess I come from it from more of a kind of product and solution development point of view. Mm-hmm. So we principally think through kind of design methods, and so we think that for tackling many of these kind of challenging siloed problems, which we understand they are, it's all about kind of developing that clear vision as to what can be achieved in the future, and kind of and the objectives, and understanding what the overall benefit would be from it. So, for example, as I said earlier on, we're very, very strong on delivering strong innovations that deliver societal change. And so, before we kind of start on kind of collaborating with people, that's one of the things that we kind of think of quite heavily, is around, well, why are we doing it? What do we want to achieve? And kind of what benefits is it going to deliver for those? Because then that then gives you a much more sustainable solution, and it also ensures that kind of all the different parties work together and collaborate much better. And I think it starts from that cross design, concept design process, because it's a combination of kind of cross industry, society, infrastructure, thinking in a systems approach, and understanding from all the different angles and different objectives what those benefits would be. And we do usually find that kind of this can help to avoid the silo behaviors and potentially single track thinking, which can happen because everybody understands more so that kind of interconnectedness and how their element potentially impact on another part of the system.
Thanks, that makes a lot of sense. And hold that thought about the shared benefits, because that's something I'm going to come back to with another question. I just had one sort of fairly specific question for you, Catherine, because we've talked about the role of ports as the centre of this system, and I think you've described that very well, and the different, the diversity of the shipping industry itself. Are there any examples from your work of sort of more direct relationships between the shipping industry and cities? Do they talk to each other? Is that something that needs to happen more? Are ports always at the centre of that? I was thinking, for example, about the green shipping corridors. Is that an area where you bring the sort of city stakeholders and shipping stakeholders together?
I'm going to simply say yes.
Good. That's okay. We like a brief answer.
Because I'm going to say yes, and again, I think it's because it depends where we are in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that port? Is that port state, government managed? Is it independent private business? And the concept of green corridors is something that is emerging, and I think we'll see a lot more in this space. It's emerging, and I think as I've mentioned already, when we look at the first mover opportunities, which green corridors, for example, and whether they are, you're looking at the entire maritime value chain, and it might be between two ports, it might be between two cities, or it might be between two countries. These things happen on regional, on different levels, and it's all to do with pace, how things but ultimately everything is going to be interdependent. And you can't just have an initiative that is city led without the industry involved, and you can't have something that is industry led without city or country or governments involved. So at the end of the day, everyone just needs to work together.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Catherine. So looking at that and picking up on what David was saying as well about the shared benefits, I'd like to just explore with each of you a kind of future scenario type foresighting. I think we know from some of the work we've done that there is a future scenario where the future of ports is not resilient. It doesn't take in this whole systems approach. Changes or decisions have been locked in a way that there might be increasing number of failures for different reasons in the future. I think all of you, the panelists here, are all advocates of not going in that direction. So I was just wondering if I think if we took 2050 and that relating to Alistair's work on the Thames Vision for 2050, what can you describe what you hope that the ports, cities, shipping system could and should look like by then, in a very brief way? I know that's a big question, but maybe start with you, Mark, on that one.
Yeah, sure. It's a really good challenge to think about. I think for me, a positive vision would mean ports and cities together exploring what shocks and stresses they may face. So both now and into the future to 2050 and beyond. and preparing for them. But it's also really important that ports and their connected systems develop more broad, resilient characteristics. So that's relating to people, to processes, to infrastructure that really acknowledges the deep uncertainty we're facing, and the fact that we can't actually predict all of the challenges that are going to come our way. So I think that kind of two-pronged approach of think about and manage risks that we can prepare for, but create a system with characteristics that mean it's ready to respond to the uncertain as well.
Excellent, thanks, Mark. I will direct the same question. So your vision for ports of the future working together in the, but the positive outcome for ports to David.
Yes, so we all like a big kind of visionary.
Absolutely,
it's one that we like to tackle, and there's obviously a very kind of broad answer, which is around. I think clearly, a very positive vision is one where it's all all stakeholders within a port kind of working together and operate it, for our point of view as well, and probably for many, is around working through a kind of digital solution system that is, partially, doing a lot of the thinking through the likes of AI and sensing and so on for different parts of the organization. So, you can have a lot of autonomous control, you can increase efficiency and a lot more effectiveness. You can increase safety as well, and improve maintenance, and have a completely net zero port that way. But also, I think it's also important that you have that interconnectivity, so with other ports and the wider city and other cities as well. And I think being able to kind of have that full interconnection will allow you to balance flows, loads, demands. You can see in the future whereby your systems can understand what's potentially coming in the future, coming in both directions, on inland and offshore, and understand, well, how do you schedule this? Do you actually work with partner ports nearby, and kind of balance the load demand there? Do you kind of balance your energy requirements accordingly? What do you do about refueling and so on? And how do you so I think there's a lot of that kind of bigger thinking and that kind of working together, which I think will give a kind of a more kind of equitable solution for the wider port industry.
Excellent, thanks, David. And I could just follow up quickly before I go back to my question. I think particularly in the space of technology and adoption of technology in ports, is there anything you can explain about what Hitachi's doing to avoid building in new vulnerabilities with these systems, sort of creating new fragilities that we weren't thinking about previously?
Yeah, so what we focus on is around developing cross value chain digital solutions. So this is firstly to ensure that the system is effectively orchestrated and integrated from the outset. So you're thinking about the right view. Also that it kind of makes clear where and how partners and collaborators will be involved. So you're thinking it from a value chain aspect, and you understand where different parties play and what their roles are very effectively. But I'd say that kind of resilience is key to our solutions. And so some of the things that we're currently developing in the energy field, we see are exploring, well, how can we apply them to other fields? For example, we've developed real-time modeling and digital twin technologies to ensure that you have an understanding of kind of potential challenges that may come along, may occur, and identify scenarios that could be applied to ensure that both availability of services and optimization occurs in the future. So, for example, if there's a power outage from a certain angle, how do you manage your power flows and avoid a downtime in energy? And you could have the same thing for operational maintenance and so on situations.
Excellent, delighted to hear it. So I'm going to come back to my sort of positive outlook question, and Catherine, I know a lot of your, almost all of your work is forward looking, so can you paint a picture for the audience of the future of the ports and shipping system?
Well, I know we've framed this around 2050, but I think 2030 is a significant milestone, and so I'd like to say, you know, what does this look like in 2030? Because I think it's something we can probably more we can relate to, and we can start to say, you know, here's the tangible actions we can take over the next 8 years, and how, you know, with it being a shorter time frame, it helps us relate to our business decisions. So I think by 2030, you know, for the shipping system, we have a breakthrough target of 5% of zero carbon fuels for international shipping, and 15% for domestic shipping. And we believe that these two breakthrough targets by 2030 are critical tipping points to put the shipping system on course for zero by 2050. So, and this is where I said we will start to see now much more large-scale demonstration projects taking place that involve all maritime actors. You know, so that is the technology providers, it is the ports, it is the shipping lines, it is the customer of shipping, it is local communities, it is national governments. So I think this collaboration, increased ambition, and resilience are key, that need to be embedded in the business decisions we're making today.
Great, thank you. So I think I left you intentionally till last, Alistair, because I know you've been giving a lot of thought about this for the PLA, for the Thames. So maybe your sort of closing comments as well on the future we should all be looking forward to.
Sure. Well, where I'd start from is that ports will remain central. One of the pieces of work that we've commissioned is a port trade forecast out to 2050, which is effectively, and it's framed as pathways to decarbonisation. And what that shows very clearly is not just trade will grow, but it will grow at the same time as we decarbonise. And that's quite, that may be quite a surprise, but nevertheless, we've validated their findings with our customers. I think the key thing is that the system, and let's regard it as a system, currently it works and it works well, but it may, as it is, it may be fragile. And I think the disruption that we've seen through something like COVID, and also through the Ever Given incident in the Suez Canal, points to the codependence within the system. And even now, we're still seeing the impacts of COVID echoing through the system with delays into European ports, for example. So from my perspective, so the port's perspective, if you like, I would very much, and I think we've heard this from everybody, build on the ports as the central hubs, then you can build out from them as integrated energy transfer exchange points, and also transport hubs better integrated into city life. And I think one thing, I like what Catherine says about 2030, because I think the pace of change, now maybe this is a COVID thing that we were all forced to stay home for 18 months and we've had time to think about stuff, but genuinely the pace of change is incredibly rapid, and we're seeing amazing projects coming forward. And just to pick up on the example of different organizations working together, absolutely seeing it in demonstration projects. Just yesterday was on a call with a number of technology providers, a barge operator in central London, and the Port Authority, talking about the new technology, how that's going to make things come together in the future. And it really circles back to my central point from earlier. Even though they are out of sight in some cities, the ports are probably going to be more central to those cities' lives in the future than they've even been before.
And that's a great note to end on, Alistair. And I think your point also about trade and trade continuing to grow is a very, very positive way of framing this whole discussion. So we've perfectly landed on the end time for our panel session. Thank you so much, everybody, for responding positively and working within our time constraints. Thank you to everyone who's been joining us, and love to hear any additional feedback from people who have watched this. But for now, I think I'll wrap up. So thank you so much again to all the panelists. Insightful contributions. Great to have this whole value chain type discussion. And I look forward to continuing to talk to and working with you all. So thanks very much.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I think we can